everyone. Welcome back to my channel. I'm excited to be joined by Jerome Sabbagh, saxophonist, composer, and owner of the label Analog Tone Factory as well. Jerome's latest album is coming out on October 17th, and it's titled Stand Up. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Jerome, I really appreciate you taking the time.
Of course, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Chris.
So let's talk about the title, Stand Up. In the last few years, I think of albums like In These Times by Makaya McCraven, The World Is on Fire by Isaiah Collier, even Force Majeure by Brandy Younger and Desron Douglas. These albums were sort of statements maybe of a particular moment in time, maybe interpreted either as a call to action or as an acknowledgement and sort of comforting kind of message. And I'm wondering if you could speak to the title Stand Up and maybe what it means to you.
Sure. This is a record that, just for context, was actually recorded on November 8th last year. So it was like the day after the election, literally, in the studio. That was very much on everybody's mind. For me, Stand Up is about first trying to figure out a way to affect our political reality in a positive way and stand for what you believe and, try to do what we can to, achieve a better outcome down the line. And also, it's also an artistic thing where, I think it's a time for all of us to really try to put out whatever artistic statements we really believe in. And, as a musician, play the best music we can with the people we really want to play with and do what we believe in.
So speaking, I guess, about the music on Stand Up, to me as a listener, it feels like some of these compositions, many of these compositions on Stand Up have distinct sort of themes or feels. And I see in the liner notes that the pieces on this album each have dedications as well. So how does that come into play with your composing? Do you start with the dedication in mind, or is it like a reflection after the fact?
For me, it's a reflection after the fact for most of the songs, except Vanguard, which I wrote very intentionally for Paul Motion, very specifically thinking of the type of music that he wrote, and also of my experience playing at the Village Vanguard this had for a week with Red Monitor. So that song was very much something I wrote for him. The other songs, the dedication kind of emerged later. There's a couple that were written for friends of mine. Those ones were also intentional. Everything else was kind of like after the fact. I started getting into the idea of having dedications, and a lot of these pieces felt like they were evoking some people to me, even if it was in a non-linear kind of oblique way. So I went for it, and I felt it was important to acknowledge some, heroes of mine musically and references and inspirations, even as they may not be that obvious for the listener.
Yeah, what always is interesting to me is when you hear some of these. Well, I'll say when musicians sort of do dedications or kind of credit and say, "Hey, this is in in reference to this particular person," and I love it when they're not always the instrument that you play, right? Like you're not
Right.
dedicating each of these to all the giants of the saxophone instrument. In
Right.
fact, I think you have Trent Reznor on here, who
Yeah.
is actually is having a very active year in a number of ways. But
Yeah. I saw they were touring again, which is
yeah,
exciting. So,
yeah. So I guess it really feels like you pull inspiration not just from, again, the giants of the instrument, but across genres. And I mean, I guess let me ask you this: Do you see yourself squarely as a jazz musician, or do you like to think of things in broader terms?
it's complicated. I do see myself as a jazz musician, but I also like to think in broader terms. So I see myself very much in the tradition of jazz as a saxophone player. It was important to me to play with Paul Motion. I did a record with Kenny Barron. I did a record with Al Foster. Like those are some of my, jazz heroes who, I was fortunate to be able to play with. So as a saxophone player, I really come from that tradition. As a writer, though, I kind of don't. So like I'm really influenced by a broader spectrum of things, including pop and rock, including Brazilian music, including classical music, including a lot of things. So it's been an interesting journey to reconcile my sort of like jazz saxophonist personality with my composer personality, which does draw from like a broader spectrum of influences. And part of the way I do that is having a band that can play all this music and trying to not box myself in either with the band or with the writing. So when I write a song, I try to let it be what it wants to be, and then I figure it out later. And then I figure it out if I like it, if I don't like it, if I want to play it, if I don't want to play it, how it's going to evolve as the band. But I try to let it be what it is. If it's like a pop song, I let it be a pop song. If it's a Brazilian song, I let it be that, and I'm okay with it. Like I don't try to write specifically jazz songs.
With this album, one of the things that occurred to me, I mean, there's a number of kind of things I think that stand out, but one of the things that occurred to me is how much the guitar can shape the feel of a song. And so, for example, there's a big difference between the texture the guitar adds in the composition High Falls, which is a sort of bossa feel,
Mm-hmm.
compared to maybe the overdriven guitar on Lone Jack. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I guess maybe using the example of Ben Monder here, who is the guitarist, is that something that you experiment with through live performances in terms of that sort of texture? Is that something you try and compose from the outset?
Both things happen. Like I knew, for example, that like there's like a pretty rambunctious, freer, open tune called Mosh Pit on there. Like that was very much flagged as like a bent distortion tune. Uh, Lone Jack, we've done both ways. Like sometimes he uses the distortion, sometimes he uses a clean sound. I kind of leave it up to him. It's one that I feel can go different ways, and it's nice when you play live to have different things. Like what works one day may not work the other day. That's one of the beauties of this music is like you try to do things differently and you try to keep it fresh. So, there are songs that I feel want a clean sound, like High Falls, you mentioned the bossa nova feel like that's very true. Like I even toyed with the idea of asking him to play acoustic on that, and then we decided not to do that. But like that's something that I was very much thinking this needs a clean sound. Mosh Pit was the opposite. A lot of the stuff falls in the middle. And because Ben has such a wide variety of sound and such a mastery of the sonic spectrum of the guitar, he usually comes up with the right thing in the right moment. And so a lot of this I leave up to him with some exceptions where I have a clear mind about what I want sound wise.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, I think, to hear that element, because a lot of folks might see this and think, oh, shouldn't there be a piano in the lineup? But the guitar offers so much versatility, whether and I always hesitate to say a musician is playing like someone or something like that. But
Mm-hmm.
I listen to Ben Monder and I almost hear like mid 50s chamber jazz, like Joe Puma kind of thing, but then he has an ability to, obviously he has a unique sound, but he also has ability to mold that according to the needs
Yeah.
of the piece. And I think, I know I'm calling him out as an example. I think all the musicians are great here, but it's very interesting to me to hear the guitar, because I think that is one of the things that makes this album feel a little bit more unique than a lot of other music that's being put out today.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Yes, Ben is like both very personal in his sound and his approach to the sound of the guitar, the harmonies, etc. And at the same time, he is very versatile, which makes it great to play with him. Another thing is like we've played together for over 20 years now. So the first record I did under my name is an album called North back in 2004, and that was already with Ben, Joe Martin on bass, with a different drummer, Ted Poor, who we did 3 records with, and this is now Nashik Waits on this record. But basically, this unit goes back 20 years, and I think that's an asset for playing this type of music, which is improvised, and you're trying to come up with different things, and it's important to trust the people that you're playing with. So that's also, something I like about still playing with these guys and still playing with the same band essentially.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this is and you just mentioned them. This is a pretty impressive lineup. I mean, I see Blue Note cred, I see ECM cred, Sunnyside cred, right? Like these guys have been on the scene for quite a while, playing for a variety of labels, leading sessions as well as playing on others.
Mm-hmm.
You also you do have a fairly routine. sort of change up of musicians, at least lately, and with your touring schedule as well. So
Hmm.
how do you think about assembling groups to perform new music, whether in studio or live? Is this based on your network or how you're feeling at the time?
A little of both. We are going to tour with this band. We have some gigs in New York, and I'm in the process of hooking up a European tour in March of next year. So this particular quartet, like we don't play all the time, but we have played regularly on and off for 20 years, and that's kind of been home base for a lot of the music I write. Uh, Other projects, I've played a lot of trio, and playing with Al Foster in particular was like a long time dream of mine, and we did that on the record called Heart that Joe Martin is also on bass on. Uh, Playing with Kenny Barron too, and like those guys weren't getting any younger, and I felt it was important to try to document those relationships while they're still possible. So that was kind of like a very intentional thing to do in those cases. Like there were projects that I really um, did to play with these people. And then I figured if we can play live, we can play live. In the case of Kenny Barron, we couldn't really do that. In the case of Al Foster, we did play live a fair amount in New York. And those things were a blessing for me. Like it's like playing with people like that is part of why I play music. So on the one track, it was like trying to play with this, some of the elders, the masters that I love, uh, and try to document some of those relationships, and at the same time really have a working band or different working bands to play my original music. So it's kind of like a duo track.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned you're currently touring. In fact, at least as of the day of this discussion, you have a gig tonight in Brooklyn with Peter Washington and Otis Brown III. You have a bunch of dates throughout the rest of the year. And I don't know. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know to what extent this is what everybody is doing, or if it's not. Like to me, it feels almost like a bit of a throwback to the idea that an album wasn't traditionally meant to just be this standalone snapshot in time thing. It was essentially a business card, a way to kind of advertise, like, hey, come see my group live, and this is a taste of what you're going to hear. So, what do you feel like? I guess is the value of a working band that you tour with and you play over time, and how does that sort of change the outcome for you?
Well, I'm not in the position where I can have one record, one working band, and then play with that band all the time. So I try to do that as much as possible, which is why we have some gigs with the band from the record until the end of the year, and then we're going to go to Europe in March. But realistically, there are times where I'm not able to get that band, and then I have other projects that I can use. Like I've been playing trio for a number of years, so now that Paul Foster is no longer with us, I'm playing with different drummers. Like Peter Washington is playing bass tonight. He's one of the great bass players of today. He plays with Art Blakey. He plays with everybody. He knows every standard on the face of the earth. He's a fantastic musician. So we've played a couple of times, and I'm really looking forward to playing with him. And I'm also really fortunate to be living in New York, where there is an incredible well of fantastic musicians. So I get to play with people who are uh, legends and who are inspirations and whose playing I love, and that's something that is one of the real advantages of living in New York. So I try to keep doing that. Now the record is still very much a calling card, and I would like to play with these guys as much as I can, but sometimes you get a gig and like you can't get your band of original music, so you do something else. I also played with Greg Tui, another guitar player who I love, and we did a record called No Filter in '98. He's been my friend for like 30 years, and we have a long-standing musical relationship. So sometimes, like, I call him for stuff, and we still have something going, and we keep developing something. So it's I'm in a place where I know a lot of people. I've played with a lot of people, and I can both draw inspiration from new people that I didn't play with all the time, and keep playing with people who I have long-standing relationships and still develop with. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. So, you mentioned the New York thing, and I love, like, I take trips to New York just to go to see see shows at Village Vanguard, and obviously I'll go
Sure.
around and do some other things. But whenever I go, I've got to get to the Vanguard and hear some music. It one of the things that occurs to me is that it feels like some years ago people were calling for like the demise of a regional sound of music
Mhm.
because of the internet, because it was easier to access and be influenced and all of these things. And maybe New York still has a distinct sound simply because of the concentration of musicians. Do you feel as a musician when you play with musicians who are based in the U.S. versus going to Europe and playing with either the scene in Finland or musicians who are part of that or the UK scene, right? Like, do you feel like there's a different skill set or perspective that you hear from your fellow musicians in these different places?
Well, yes, I do. I think New York is a pretty unique scene still. I think it's even unique in the US. So it's not just a US, Europe, or US, Japan, or whatever divide. It's like it's in New York versus other places divide. Like there's so many musicians here, there's so much competition, the level of play, so to speak, is so high that like there's a unique kind of blend of things here. There's new people coming from all over the world trying to make it in New York, whatever that means to them, or whatever that means these days. Um, and some of the elders, fortunately, are still with us, and you can still see them, at the Vanguard or elsewhere. Um, and that's a truly inspiring thing. And I think it helps you develop a certain sound, or at least have some of that history and some of that sound of the scene. Like I feel I have some of that in me, even though I grew up in Paris and I am European by birth. But I've lived here for a long time. So I've lived in Brooklyn for like 30 years. I go out a lot. I've heard a lot of music. I keep hearing a lot of music. So I think the New York thing is very much a part of me and a very important part of my sound. Now, when I go to Europe and I play with musicians there, level has really come up, and like there are great musicians there for sure. There are very personal musicians there that really have their own thing. I'm thinking of somebody like Marc Ducret, who's like one of my favorite guitar players in France. Daniel Humer, who's a French drummer who's now 87 years old, and he's played with everybody from Johnny Griffin and Dexter Gordon to Roland Kirk and Cannonball and Joe Henderson, but also Michael Brecker, and also a lot of like freer European driven improvised music, which is what I tend to play when I play with him, because that's kind of where he's at now. So yeah, it is a different thing, like in December, I'm going to go to Paris and I'm going to play with like a local rhythm section. I'm going to play my music. I'm going to play the music from the record. I'm going to send the charts before, and it'll be a different thing. Everybody brings a different sensibility to it, and part of my role, I think, as a band leader, if we're going to play my music, is to provide enough of a sense of direction that like the musicians over there who may not be as familiar with the music as I am have a sense of what to do and which direction to go in.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. So I know that a lot of musicians want the focus to be purely on the music, but it's with you, it's hard to not also talk about the delivery format. So, especially given you're a label owner, so you've started to release music on vinyl, on CD, also on reel to reel. You've even recently added a one-step vinyl format,
Mm-hmm.
and of course always the option again is to see music live, right? So is this kind of a strategy to sort of meet people where they are with their music listening?
Partly, it's also, I mean, the vinyl thing is a real kind of dream of mine because it's something I started somewhat by accident 10 years ago or 11 years ago. I did this record called The Turn, which was actually with the previous version of this band. So Ben Monder, Joe Martin, Ted Poor. And I've always been really interested in sound because as a saxophone player, I work on sound all the time. So when I started recording, I really was not an audiophile, but I became one. And I kind of became one out of necessity because I was trying to figure it out actually on the studio side. So on the recording side, I was trying to figure out what mics do I like what converters do I like? Do I like recordings pan this way or that way, who are my favorite engineers to work with. So that's how I got to work with James Farber, because I realized a lot of the records that I liked in contemporary jazz were recorded by James Farber. So I called him up and I was like, "Can I work with you?" And I learned a lot from him. But as far as delivery format, 10 years ago, I started really getting into, mastering engineers and trying to figure out who to use. And so I reached out to Doug Sachs, who's a mastering legend and whose work I really liked. And he's the guy who mastered the turn. And then he suggested, even though it was a bit of a hybrid record, it was recorded to tape, but then bounced to high res digital, because I didn't have enough money to keep it all on tape at the time. He suggested cutting it to vinyl. And he was like, "This is a really good sounding record. I think you should let me cut it to vinyl," which I didn't have a budget for. So I raised some money on Kickstarter, and that's how the whole thing started. I got enough to get him to cut the record, and then that record got like talked about, and people liked the way it sounded, and particularly on vinyl, like Michael Fremer talked about it, and that kind of like got a lot of people interested. And I ended up running out of the 500 copies that I pressed, and I ended up pressing another 500 copies, and that's how the whole thing started. Then the next thing after that is like, I knew I liked the sound of tape better than digital. Like, I knew that. But I didn't think it was a realistic proposition to go analog all the way until the turn came along and enough people bought it that I was like, well, perhaps, just perhaps, I can raise enough money to buy enough tape and do this all analog, which I suspected would sound better. So that's what I did for the next record, which was No Filter in 2018. And yeah, I learned a lot with the process. I do think keeping everything analog sounds better, whether you're listening to reel or vinyl. And so that's kind of what I've been doing since. So it's partly like meet people where they are. Like, there is a vinyl resurgence. So I think from a commercial standpoint, it's interesting because you can't really sell digital music anymore. Like, everybody streams. Us musicians, we don't really make any money. So it's like, I can't produce a record off digital. It's just impossible. So I can't put out new music recorded at a high quality in digital. Like, if enough people buy it on vinyl, I can. I also happen to think that it really does sound better. So it's kind of like a confluence of things where it's like, well, that's the best sounding thing that I know how to make. And if there's enough people buying it, then I can keep doing this and producing new music, which is what I want to do for my music and also for other people's music. It was the label a few months ago, we put out a Chris Cheek record. He's a great saxophone player, a little older than I am. And Bill Frisell is on it. That was a dream to work with him. Tony Sher on bass, Rudy Royston on drums, and that's called Keepers of the Eastern Door. And I'm, really proud of that record because it's the first one we put out that's not a record of mine. And we kind of did it as an experiment, and that was encouraging. And we're going to try to keep doing it, and ideally, I'd even like to expand beyond jazz and record other genres of music. And we're looking at it.
Yeah, that's quite an undertaking. So I mean, short term, obviously you're going to be promoting the album and touring. Are you do you feel like you're able to sort of balance that desire to perform with the responsibility of owning a label, putting out music by others?
Yeah, I mean, I am, but it's hard. It's a lot of time. I knew that like running this label uh, was going to be very time consuming. It turns out to be more time consuming than I thought it was, because right now, we're very small. So it's like, it's a friend of mine, engineer and pianist Pete Randy, who really helps on the technical side. And then it's me doing logistics, organizing, financing, shipping. Like, if you buy a record from Analog Tone Factory, I'm the one who shipped it. Like, there's a stash of records in my house right now. There's like a big truck that's going to come in a few weeks with a pallet with like, 20 boxes or 30 boxes of records. I'm the one who's going to get it up to the second floor and like put it all in my apartment. And so at some point, maybe I'll be able to hire somebody, like get some space somewhere else, et cetera, et cetera. But like right now, it's me doing a lot of this work, and it's kind of the way it has to be for it to be financially feasible for now. So, maybe 5 years from now, we're in a different phase. But yeah, it does take a lot of time. And I'm both very focused on that because it's an outlet that allows me to record music I love, my music, the music of other people. But also, I want to stay really focused on the actual music making, practicing the saxophone, writing tunes, getting out there as a band leader, playing live, etc., etc. So it's a balancing act.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a charm to it, though, at least as a consumer. Like, I know if I go to PM Sounds, that Gene Pearl is going to be the customer service
Mhm.
person who responds to me,
Right.
and that's
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's fantastic. But yeah, so this is it's a very interesting space that it feels to me like you're in, both as a you're musician and label owner, and the focus on sort of the keen focus on how it sounds because you have your
Hmm.
own kind of preferences. And if I think of who's in this space, I just don't know who I'd even say. I mean, I think Sam First is doing a lot of interesting things with
Hmm.
their club out in LA, and they're putting out similarly fantastic, releases in a in sort of a contained and very curated way.
Hmm.
Um, but it feels to me like you're kind of going at this community of people who are very passionate, perhaps have high expectations as well. But
Sure.
this community
Absolutely.
of yeah, because I mean, as far as I can tell, like music is about building communities, and jazz certainly is a community of people who want to support musicians they love and introduce those musicians to others. And then within that, there's this like weird vinyl community
Hmm.
of people who get who again, like I said, high expectations and get really into it. And I sense a lot of energy around what it is that you're doing, and it feels like you kind of know what this community wants, and you've been able to deliver it. I mean, these first three albums, and I know that I'm just saying that within the context of Analog Tone Factory, even though you've been producing music in this way for some time, but these first three albums with the new label are fantastic, and they sound different than other new music that's coming out.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, the weird final nerd thing. The thing is, like, I'm one of those people up to a point. Like, I buy a vinyl. If there's a new record that's analog and it's music that interests me, I'll almost always buy the record. Uh, if it's even high res digital on vinyl and I know it's well done, I usually buy the vinyl. I think the point of having music, people buy your music is the only way we can finance stuff. So I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for the fans of the music. I'm grateful for the fans who approach it from the standpoint of audio quality and get into my music because they've heard it's well recorded and because I try to be careful about pressing it and Bernie Grundman cuts it and we're super careful every step of the way. So, if there's a flaw in the record and it happens, I try to take care of it. Like I try to do good customer service. I want people to be happy, and I'm grateful that people are getting into the music because they've heard it sounds good and they want to support it. Honestly, it's a blessing, So it gains me new people who are appreciative of my music, and it's a very good thing because otherwise you put it out there, everybody listens to it on Spotify, you don't make any money, and you can't really function. So yeah, I really make an effort to do everything as best I can, and hope that people like it. Like there's even some people who got into the label because we were doing a one step, which was a Chris Cheek record, and now we're doing a one step for this one. And the way that came about was like more than anything, I think I wanted to satisfy my own curiosity because I had heard about the one step process, and I was like, well, is it better? Is it not better? Depending on who you ask, you'll get people telling you it's better. There's also the opposite opinion, and I've heard people I respect, come on either side of that. So I wanted to find out for myself. So I got test pressings, and then I listened, and I was like, wow, well, I think it's really better. So I went for it, and then some people like also like that we're doing that, so they're getting the music into the music that way. So I wouldn't have done it if I thought it was a gimmick and if it didn't sound better to me. But it's also an asset that it makes people talk about the label and people buy the records, you know. So, and same with tape, you know, like I didn't think there was necessarily much of a market for it. And it's a small market, but, you know, a few dedicated people really wanting to listen to your music on tape, like it helps, you know, like these records are really expensive to make. And whatever we can do to help keep producing new music is super helpful. And also, you know, tape sounds great. It's like super expensive, but like, you know, it really is a different experience.
Yeah, for sure. And again, kind of meeting people where they are, right? It's like if you're the type of listener who gets everything they need out of that all analog vinyl edition, then that's great. And if you're somebody who you've invested in the equipment and you really like the sound of the one step, et cetera, like you're gonna get that value out of going for that option. So no, I think it's great to have options, especially if it grows the audience, right? If it brings more passionate people to the
Yeah,
place, it's a good thing.
I think so, and we're still doing CDs, and we try to make the CDs be as good as they can be. A lot of the jazz press still want CDs, so that's one of the reasons. A lot of Chris Cheek wanted CDs because he wants to be able to go on the road and sell them. So we keep doing that. We have high res digital, and that's on Bandcamp. If anybody is into that, like they can download it, and it's 192.24 on Bandcamp, which is high res and sounds very good to me. Uh, I am also getting into DSD 256, and that's also to kind of give people what they want. I've been asked to do it, so I got transfers from the tapes for the record, and we're in the process of like figuring out a way to put that out. But hopefully, a month or two from now, it'll all be on the website, and people who are into that format will be able to get to listen to the music that way.
So I want to leave everyone with a reminder. So the album Stand Up is out on October 17th, and it's available for pre-order now on Analog Tone Factory's website. And I'm actually going to include the link here on the screen so that you can see it. If you put in a pre-order, you can actually get the standard all analog vinyl release for the discounted price of $35. If you want that one-step version that Jerome mentioned, the discounted price is $70. It's also going to be available, as we discussed, on CD, on reel-to-reel, digital. So check out the website for more details. You can preview the album as well by checking out the first three singles that are available right now, either on YouTube or really wherever you stream. And then finally, of course, go to Jerome's website, check out his touring schedule, especially if you're going to find yourself in New York, LA, or Paris. So thanks, Jerome, very much for taking the time to talk about this new release. I know I'm excited, and I'm sure that many folks out there are as well.
Thanks a lot, Chris. It's been a pleasure.